watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown.
Hello and welcome to Law Talk on Germantown Municipal Television. My name is Vince Perryman. I'm a local attorney with the law offices of J. Vincent Perryman. Each month, Law Talk focuses on a wide range of issues and legal topics. Today's show will discuss cybersecurity. With us now is attorney Justin Joy. Justin, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks very much for having me, Vince. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so, the whole cyber realm of security and identity theft type things going on, and then, with the election stuff, we have all of this talk about cybersecurity. And I think a lot of people may, depending on what age group they're in, they may very well sit there at home and scratch their head and go, well, what exactly are they talking about? So what's the starting point for this topic of law? Yes.
Well, and I'm glad that we're starting our conversation off today with that point, because I think that's a very important foundational issue for people to understand. Mm-hmm. In what context are we talking about cybersecurity? As I see cybersecurity, it relates to keeping information confidential, which may be obvious to most people, but also mm-hmm. relates to keeping the integrity, maintaining the integrity of information so people are not coming in and changing that information. And it also pertains to the availability of that information. If you've lost information or you can't access it for various reasons, that's obviously a security problem as well. But I do want to add a point that I think gets somewhat confused when you're talking about cybersecurity, and that's privacy. And mm-hmm. it's a bit of a different issue than cybersecurity in the sense that privacy is more focused on your right to control the information about you, what you're sharing with companies, what those companies are doing with that information. For instance, how long are they retaining it? Are they destroying it after you are no longer affiliated with them? Are they sharing that information with other companies? So it really has to be looked at in two ways. Again, the security or cybersecurity side, mm-hmm. and then the privacy side of things. Yeah, and on the privacy side of things, it makes me think of the all the different financial institutions I do business with. Occasionally throughout the year, they'll send me a one-pager that's, what do we do with your information? That's right. Now, whether or not I've ever read it, I don't think I have. Yeah. So what all do you see with, if we start with privacy, what all is there out there in that realm, I guess, to protect individuals' information? What information are we talking about? Well, when you're looking at protection of privacy, that is where some of the data breach notification statutes come into play. For mm-hmm. instance, 48 states in the United States now have statutes that require companies doing businesses in those states to notify consumers in certain instances when data has been breached. Now, when you hear about a data breach, mm-hmm. And a recent one is the Uber breach, where, from what I've read, involves the names, email addresses, and telephone numbers. In a lot of states, mm-hmm. that's not covered by data breach notification laws. It is in some, but it's not, I would say, not in most. So people, I think, have a misunderstanding as to the scope of protection of privacy from a legal perspective. Mm-hmm. In the United States, we have sector-driven privacy protections. In the financial sector, that's where you get the notice of privacy policies from financial institutions. In the healthcare sector, with HIPAA, you have the notice of privacy practices, but again, that's sector specific. It's mm-hmm. not broad across the spectrum covering all industry. So you have to look to see if there is a statute that covers the sector in which you're talking about, and if not, is there a state data breach notification law or other statute that may protect privacy in other areas. There's a number of other federal privacy statutes protecting the information of children, mm-hmm. And other types of things that are out there that we don't hear very much about. But again, I think there's this misconception about how broad privacy protection really is in the United States. Yeah, and I think there's also the misperception too as to whether or not you've got a cause of action when there's a breach. Exactly. But one question that I think comes to my mind with this when we think of the little bit I've read on the Uber stuff, and then when Office of Personnel Management got hit,
Is there any protection for employees' data?
In many cases, yes. If an employee's, say, their social security number has been compromised in a breach, then in most instances, again, depending upon the state law that you're talking about, notification would have to be provided to the employee. So at least they know that there's been a compromise or a believed compromise of their information. But again, you typically have to look to state law to see, the scope of the information that's covered by those laws. Social security numbers usually are.
Yeah, because I would also think that you might have some stuff in it, because when I think about Uber, everybody they use, they cut as an independent contractor.
Right.
So they may have a different set of regulations there compared to what an actual employee would have. But it seems to be a very, the landscape is vast, and it would be hard for any individual to kind of be able to track all of it.
Any individual or any company as well. Even just using the one company, Uber as an example, in this breach that we've heard about in the news recently, you have basically two sets of data. You have the customer data, which to my knowledge, from what we know from recent reports, appears to be limited to the name, email address, and phone number. But you also have another set of data which involves the driver's license numbers, if I understand the reports correctly, that have also been involved, and that does implicate, in many instances, a higher level of data protection. Yeah,
because I think when somebody applies on being an Uber driver, because I've represented a couple that had that at a divorce, and it's like, what all do you have to do? They provide like an image of the driver's license, an image of their car insurance information, and I think, and then like the social security number and that sort of the tax ID stuff. And then, I think about it from the consumer standpoint, because you had the breach with Home Depot several years back, and on the consumer standpoint, you've always got the credit card numbers and things like that. So, it's an interesting thing to think about, so when I think about it, as I'm filling out the different information, what are some of the things I should be thinking about as I'm giving a company my information?
I think whether we're talking about privacy or cybersecurity, I try to come up with analogous in-person examples. So for instance, if you're thinking about the information that you're providing to a third party, put yourself in the situation where you've just met someone and they're asking you a series of questions. What is your name? Most people are pretty comfortable with saying, my name is so-and-so. Where do you live? And when you start to, say, beyond just Germantown or beyond Memphis, and you get more specific like an address, that's where hesitations start to come in. What is your social security number? Most people, I think, would stop there and not get that information out unless they know why that person asking them for the information, why do they need that? What are they going to do with it? Same thing with the driver's license number. So I think when you're filling out an application, even on paper, but certainly online, where you don't know who is on the other side of that screen, at least figuratively speaking, you do need to be thoughtful about the level of information that you're sharing. What are they doing with it? Like you mentioned earlier with the notice of privacy policies, very few people read those things, but sometimes when you read those things, you may not want to share that information. And frankly, you may want to do business with somebody else that has a stronger privacy practice in terms of what they're protecting, what they're not sharing, what they do with that information after you're no longer their customer.
Okay, and that's a great spot to take a break. When we return, we'll continue our discussion about cybersecurity. Please stay with us.
You make me wear my bike helmet. Taught me never to run with scissors. And to follow the swimming rules.
You tell me to stay away from drugs.
To always buckle my seatbelt.
So why do you keep a loaded gun in your drawer?
How safe is that?
You asked them to follow some safety rules. Now they're asking you. In fact, they're counting on you. Never let your gun get into the wrong hands. Remember, always lock it up. Visit ncpc.org.
Looks like it's done.
Don't let salmonella get funky with your chicken. On average, 1 in 6 Americans will get a foodborne illness this year. You can't see these microbes, but they might be there. So learn the right temperature to cook each type of meat. Keep your family safe at foodsafety.gov.
You are watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown.
Welcome back. I'm Vince Perryman, and you're watching Law Talk. Joining us on today's show is attorney Justin Joy. We're discussing cybersecurity. So, Justin, before the break, we went into all the different privacy issues that are out there, and talking about what is done with your information you give with them, and kind of what you should be thinking about when you give information. So how does it work when I get notice or I see on the TV that potentially my information was breached?
Well, I would suggest even before you get that notice to follow some basic practices to watch out for identity theft, because the reality is, as we see in almost every instance, it takes months and in some cases years for companies to even discover that a breach has occurred. And then it takes sometimes to notify customers that a breach has occurred. So even if a breach has been discovered or will be discovered in the immediate future, it's going to be a while before you learn about that. So I personally take the position that at some point, some information about me has been exposed, has been compromised. So I think along those lines with that mindset, it's always good to be looking in a proactive way for things that would raise some suspicions about someone misusing your information. So you always need to be looking at least on a monthly basis, your financial account statements, for instance. Most banks, most credit card companies offer apps that you can look at activity in a real-time fashion. You can either sign up for account alerts that above a certain dollar amount, you get an email or a text message. But at a minimum, you need to be looking at those financial account statements once a month. I would also suggest looking at your healthcare account statements when they come in. Explanation of benefits, bills from doctor's office, because medical identity theft, which you don't hear as much about, is a real problem as well.
Right.
I would also suggest on an annual basis getting your free annual credit report and seeing if an account has been opened unbeknownst to you and someone is using your name to get credit. You may not even know that account has been open for a long time until the person who was stolen your information, using your information, is probably not paying that bill. And then the creditor comes looking to you for a payment, and that's the first time that you ever hear about it. If you do receive a notice that your information has been involved, or at least believed to have been involved in a data breach, you can think about signing up for a fraud alert, which for a period of 90 days will basically require credit bureaus to send you an alert to contact you if someone tries to take out new credit, open a new account in your name. Especially if you know that your information has been compromised, which in many cases is difficult to tell. I mean, a lot of times you don't actually see the information being stolen, actually see the information being misused in real time. But if you are concerned about that, or certainly if you have information that has actually happened, you may want to think about putting in a security freeze or a credit freeze, which is actually a step above the fraud alert. And the security freeze is supposed to prohibit any use of your credit file. It's essentially closing your credit file from anyone opening credit in your name. There can be some delay in opening a new credit account if that's something that you're thinking about doing in the immediate future, so that's kind of the downside in that. But the upside is it's supposed to really put a lockdown on your credit file. There's a lot of information available at the Federal Trade Commission. If you just want to look for FTC or Federal Trade Commission and consumer information or identity theft protection, there's a lot of very specific information available there for consumers to go to and look at these various items that I've just discussed. Yeah,
and I think one area that I saw it in that I was surprised in was where people were filing fraudulent returns with the Internal Revenue Service. We were in the middle of an audit for an insurance sales guy, and he happened to not have filed a prior year. And in the middle of the audit goes, oh, and then we need to talk about the prior year that you filed. And we're like, what are you talking about? We didn't file this. And the string of explicatives come out of the IRS revenue person's mouth because of all the paperwork that they've now got to fill out to flag this, because there's a whole division with the IRS on the identity theft.
That's becoming a big problem. And identity thieves fraudsters generally are looking for more, I guess you'd say, higher rates of return on their efforts, and those tax returns are a big target these days.
Yeah, and you know, even to the elderly that may say, well, I'm just on Social Security and I don't file a return regularly, they may want to reach out to the IRS and ask for a tax transcript on a yearly basis, because that may show where a return has been filed. Because what I've seen in my area is where you'll have an elderly individual and it'll be one of their relatives will file a return and then put someone else's children on there to get earned income credit, which is now a guaranteed audit. So if you get any paperwork from the IRS and you know that you didn't file it, you probably need to lock down your identity.
And that's a great suggestion about getting that transcript. It's analogous to getting that annual credit report every once in a while, because as I mentioned, you know, the data breaches themselves are oftentimes very hard to detect. I think a lot probably do go undetected. And in some cases, especially with the tax return fraud that you're talking about, the only way that a taxpayer knows that they've been a victim of fraud is they go to file their tax return and it's rejected because one's already been filed, unbeknownst to them, by one of these fraudsters.
Yeah, and the service is doing a better job of trying to match up the W-2 with the return, because that was something, it was just always odd to me how they would kick out a refund without matching them up. So now that's delaying everybody's refund by about a month in tax season.
Well, and I'm really not paranoid, because you're only paranoid if it's not real, right?
Yeah.
But on that point, that's where a lot of the attacks against employers are coming, is that fraudsters are going after the W-2 information for that reason. So they have that information to file those false returns. So employers are increasingly becoming a target, not for the money in the financial accounts, but for the information on their employees, so they can use that information to file those fraudulent returns.
Yeah, so, you know, it's one of these that I always think about it from both sides. What, you know, if you think you know where the breach was and you give somebody notice, I mean, what's kind of the best way of, if you're an individual approaching a company and saying, hey, I think you might have, this may be where they got this. I mean, is there any good way to do that?
In most instances, especially with larger and mid-sized companies, the answer has at least largely been found on that, because usually they'll bring in a forensic investigation firm that will go through their systems, go through all their computers that have been infected or affected by the breach to determine the cause of the breach, to see if any information was taken, stolen in the breach. But if you have suspicions, if there's something that is showing up on your bank account or on your credit card statement, or certainly pertaining to your tax return, you do need to let someone know if you've not received that notice, so you can begin to kind of backtrack to find where that problem may have arisen.
Okay, that's a great place for a break. When we return, we'll talk more with Justin Joy about cybersecurity.
How can I help my daughter with her reading?
Searching for help with Dachshund breeding.
No.
Let me try. Sarah's bright, but when she's reading, she has trouble sounding out words.
Playing world music.
What?
I give up.
Wait, I was trying to show you how Sarah feels every day. Frustrating, isn't it? Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
You are watching Germantown Municipal Television, your source for everything Germantown. Welcome back. With us now is Justin Joy, and we're talking about cybersecurity.
Justin, we've talked a lot about individuals and what they can do. If somebody's got a small company, or just a small business, what all can they do?
Well, I think they need to do something because I think the thought that, well, I'm too small, no one will bother me is not a valid thought. I think if anything, it could be the opposite. A lot of these fraudsters know that the larger corporations have got the resources, at least for the technical fortifications. So the smaller companies are in many cases softer and sometimes easier targets. So regardless of the size of your company, I would suggest that you be ready for one of these data breaches. Who are you going to contact if you've got a data breach on your hands? Do you have legal counsel that you can work with to walk you through this process? Do you have cyber insurance that can pay for legal costs, that can pay for breach notification, that can pay for investigations? I would suggest, again, a company of any size to have some basic policies and procedures in place, not only pertaining to incident response. What are you going to do when you're breached, because it is a matter of when, not if you're breached. But also before then, what kind of basic security measures does your company have in place? Are you regularly updating your patches? Do you have security awareness training for your employees? And again, when I say employees, that can be just one, just two, because it only takes that one or two weak links in an otherwise well-fortified defense for an attacker to get through and compromise your system.
Yeah, and the thing that I always would tell when I was talking to auditor groups were, have somebody at the company read through the cybersecurity insurance policy, because it may have certain requirements, where you get into all the technical data in there. And if you're not meeting that, then you've got a policy you've paid for, but you violated it, so they're not going to pay out anything.
And that's a great point. The cyber insurance market has been around for a number of years now. Relatively speaking, however, it is still new. I think there's still a lot of small and mid-sized businesses that have really not looked very carefully at that, but they need to, because their general commercial liability policy is not going to cover a cyber event in most cases.
Right, and then, so just for the basic consumer, what are some things that we can do to protect ourselves from having our information breached?
I think good practices at the consumer level in many ways is just like good practices at the end user level in an organization. So, at home, need to regularly update passwords and make them more than just, instead of password 123 and password 456, come up with something that's strong, that's hard to guess, that may be difficult to remember. And if it is difficult to remember, consider using a password manager. There's a number of available online. Some I think are very cheap or free, but most of them are pretty good. You need to make sure that you're updating your PC regularly. A lot of the malware, especially the ransomware that we hear a lot about today, makes its way across systems and into systems because systems have not been properly patched. Be aware of websites that you're visiting. Make sure that before you provide any of the sensitive information that we were talking about earlier, that first of all, it's a site that you think that you're at. Make sure that you're at the right web address. That especially if you've clicked a link to get there, make sure that it's got the padlock, that it's a secure site, not an open site. You want to have antivirus protection on your computer to watch out for malware. Antivirus has been around for a long time, but I think a lot of people don't use it properly in the sense they may not keep it updated, they may not have it on, it may be bothersome with all the notifications, but that's why it's there. And I would suggest keeping your data backed up, whether that's backed up on the cloud through an online service or say an external hard drive. Keeping it backed up certainly doesn't prevent all data loss, but it's a good measure against a lot of data loss that we're now seeing in ransomware and other forms of malware. But consumers need to be aware, just like businesses do, that fraudsters are coming after them. We're seeing more and more attacks on mobile devices and tablets. So just because you're on your phone or your tablet, you're not secure there either.
And there's a lot of people out there that are the die-hard Apple Mac users, and they seem to always want to say, oh, well, we're better secure than everything else. But now we've seen an uptick in attacks on the Mac platform, have we not?
We have, and it's not necessarily so much, I'm not an IT person, but from what I gather, it's not necessarily so much that Macs are more secure per se, it's just that there's more bad stuff out there for PCs.
Yeah.
So PCs are more often the target of the malware. And in many cases, the bad guys are going after PC and Windows operating systems as opposed to Mac systems. But there's plenty of things out there that are coming after Apple's coming after Macs that people need to be aware of. So just like with the PC, you got to keep your OS and your iOS updated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's the, what is it, that thing pops up all the time in the middle of something and you're like, how do I get this off my screen? You know?
Well, and the reason it's popped up in almost every case is that someone has identified a vulnerability in that operating system. And if once it's gone out that there's this vulnerability, all the bad guys know that vulnerability is out there. So now, if your system, even if your system is just a phone in your pocket, it is not patched, it's not updated, then it's vulnerable to a known exploit that someone could take advantage of and steal your information or delete your data.
And something that I think that people aren't thinking about now, I was, I don't know, my IT guy was on vacation or whatever, so I was looking at a Wi-Fi log, trying to figure out I don't know, I was doing stuff I shouldn't be doing. I should be paying somebody to do it. But in this, I started looking and I was like, who are all these people that have been on our network? And it would register people's vehicles outside of my office that are Wi-Fi compatible. And we don't think about the cars having this access, the household appliances, and thermostats, things like that, where, even those, if there's an update for them, people need to think about updating.
Certainly. The so-called Internet of Things is really the next frontier in cybersecurity, and we've already seen instances where those household connected devices are being leveraged to launch attacks.
So before we sign off here, if one of those small business folks is sitting there going, I got that cybersecurity policy, I need to get a hold of Justin to get him to look over that. What's the law firm that you're with?
I'm with the law firm of Lewis Thomason, our Memphis office. We have offices in Nashville and Knoxville, but I'm here in Memphis.
Yeah, and that's the thing is people always have to realize, it's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we thank you for being with us today, and our time is up for this edition of Law Talk, and I'd like to thank our guest for taking time out of his busy schedule and being with us and sharing his thoughts and insights. If you'd like more information about Law Talk or any other program on Germantown Municipal Television, please refer to our website at www.gmtvonline.org. Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to join us next month for more legal topics. Until then, I'm Vince Perryman. Thank you for watching.